Just waiting for the red box, right? Right, there we go. Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6:03 p.m. And I bring regrets from Trustee Keller, Trustee Bailey, and Trustee Ropey, who Trustee Ropey may be able to attend later. Trustees Bailey and Keller are both away tonight for sure. All right, so with that said, we do have quorum and we can proceed. So I will ask trustees if you have any additions, deletions, or changes in order for tonight's agenda. Oh, I forgot to do I apologize. I do want to acknowledge our territory. I did forget to do that. With great respect and humility, we acknowledge and honor the lands of the Snuneymuxw people. The Snuneymuxw people maintain their profound, unique, and spiritual connection to the land through ageless traditions, teachings, stewardship, and expressions of reciprocity. I do apologize. It's such a beautiful day. I was out in the land today, looking out at the water over towards Newcastle. I can't remember how to pronounce Newcastle's Hulkaminum name, and I got way too much sun and way too much pollen in my eyes, and I'm a little bit off a bit. Anyways, but I will recover. And now I will ask for additions, deletions, and changes in order for tonight's agenda. And reminder, please, to use the chat later when we are moving motions and so on and so forth. Seeing no additions, deletions, or changes in order, I'm seeking a motion to approve the agenda. Moved by Mark Robinson, Trustee Robinson. Seconder, please. Seconded by Trustee McKay. Thank you. Anyone opposed to accepting the agenda as presented? All right. Thank you. Seeing none, motion to approve the agenda is accepted unanimously. And now I will seek a motion to accept the minutes of the Business Committee meeting held on April 12th, 2023. Moved by Mark Robinson. Thank you. Seconded by Charlene McKay. Seconded. Thank you. And now we have the privilege tonight of having two presentations under item 7. Our first presentation is from Jeremy Inscoe, NDTA president, and I believe Jeremy is going to be speaking about budget issues tonight. So Jeremy, whenever you're ready, you can turn on your camera, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and good evening to you, trustees, staff, and guests. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties here, so I've got like multiple computers in my hand because only one wants to log in. It was just this week that the World Health Organization declared an end to the COVID-19 as a global health emergency. And while the acuity and frequency of infections has dramatically decreased and allowed for return to in-person meetings, given reprieve to the unfathomable failure to fill rates, decreased the crippling anxiety felt at the unknown consequences of simply being a close contact of another human being, and mitigated the uncertainty of the what next, the effects of COVID-19 will continue to be felt deeply throughout the education sector and will be for a long time unless boards such as yourselves continue to make tangible efforts to address them. At the height of the pandemic, NLPS took bold steps to provide food, technology, and educational opportunity to students and their families. Undoubtedly, these equity measures made an immeasurable difference in the lives and education of those we serve in the NLPS community. But the work's not done yet. We can't say the pandemic is over and bask in the return to normal that we so longed for. Normal is fleeting and dynamic. We have a new normal. One where students and staff alike have endured highly stressful events, thoughts, feelings for an extended time. And as a result of this and a shortage of traditional supports, we're witnessing a predictable trauma response: anxiety, depression, dysregulation, and violence. In this budget cycle, NETA is asking that the board maintain a financial focus on a strategic recovery and target funds to specifically address services to our most vulnerable students, the ones who are categorically the deepest impacted by the circumstances of the past 3 years. In doing so, we can continue to progress towards our next normal, toward one that balances responsivity and prevention. Specifically, we ask that staffing for school counselors be bolstered as much as possible, such that they can provide timely and practical services to students without suffering caregiver burnout themselves, which is currently a very real problem, and thus in turn support classroom teachers by addressing these students' trauma responses. Notably, Notably, a variation of this is already being presented by staff, but if there's any opportunity to increase counseling services more, then it will be seen as a valuable investment in students and staff. We also asked that the board return to the past practice of employing a teacher teaching on call the first day that a teacher who does not enroll a class is absent. By this, we're mainly talking about inclusion support teachers, but also teacher librarians and counselors. Inclusion support teachers' primary job is to provide direct supports to the most vulnerable, yet they were frequently and repeatedly pulled from these important duties to act as TOCs when we had hundreds upon hundreds of failures to fill in the past few years. This caused hundreds of days of lost targeted services and further compounded the challenge in providing adequate supports to these students. We ask now that the board builds momentum in returning these lost services by at a minimum returning to practice of replacing non-enrolling teachers on their first day of absence and refraining from using them further as TOCs. Thank you.
Mute here. Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Jeremy? Anybody? Okay. Well, seeing none, Jeremy, thank you very much. Heichka, I raised my hands to you. It was a very good presentation. You make very good points, and we look forward to discussing it further as we get further into the budget. And now, item 7.2 is our presentation from Jeff Vertanen of CUPE.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Hi, everyone. All right, let's get right to this. CUPE does have a few concerns about this budget. So we'll address those concerns first, and then we'll offer a couple of ideas on how we can turn this not bad status quo budget into something really awesome. So first, we find the tone of this budget comes off as a bit gloomy, in our opinion. We fully understand the finance department wanting to be conservative with its tone and numbers, but there's lots of good news in this budget here too. Because remember, there's a cost of doing business when providing the world-class education that NOPS delivers. There's money in this budget to make that educational experience for our students even better. Our second concern is CUPE is losing 3 full-time equivalent positions in this proposed budget. We know it looks like it's more, but some of those positions were linked to one-time funding, but our math shows that we're still losing 3 full-time equivalencies. And we appreciate we're not actually showing workers the door because there's vacancies in that, but those positions are still lost to our membership. So we feel that those savings should at least be directed to other CUPE areas. Our third concern is it's on page 21 of the budget and the proposed new management position for recruitment and retention. That was pretty confusing to us. We just met with management just today, actually, and they've come up with this idea that makes it harder for temp employees to become regular employees. So we find it contradictory that you can hire a manager to recruit and retain. At the same time, you're going to take away the very reasons that would want to make employees stay here. So if you really want to recruit and retain CUPE employees, we're going to give you some ideas here. 1, don't make it harder for temps to become regulars. 2, if we can just close and lessen that wage gulf between the wages that we pay and the wages that other employers pay. And I'll delve into that in a second. And 3, the big one, offer more hours to our lowest hour positions. And I'll really delve into that in a second. So there you go. If you follow that simple advice, your recruitment and retention problems are going to improve drastically. You don't even need a manager for that anymore. Okay, so that's your concerns. Let's move on to the 2 ideas that we'd really like the board to consider for this year's budget. We'll start with the easier one, closing the wage gulf that exists between certain jobs. After many years of 0% wage improvements in the K-12 sector, a large gap has been created between certain jobs. We're hearing many examples of people that want to come work here, but the lower wages or the lower hours, they're a significant barrier. You know, if you can get $10 an hour more to be an IT person or an HVAC technician or a bus mechanic elsewhere in the city, where are you going to go? You know, to be fair, we got a pretty decent benefits package to take into consideration. So that's why we're not saying we think the wages have to be exact. We're just asking us if we can close that gulf a little bit. As if you just work a 40-hour work week, it would cost you roughly $2,000 a year to offer $1 an hour more. And that's really super cheap compared to farming it out. I mean, we've heard Mark talk at this committee about the high cost of farming out bus mechanic work, for example. If we can lessen that wage gap, it is going to be cheaper in the long run. The number 1 area we'd really like the board to focus on is the number of hours that our lowest hour positions currently have. And it's predominantly our EAs. I know you guys are probably really tired of hearing me harp on about it. So why don't we just go to some of those budget surveys that the district did, and let's take 4 of the top 6 responses. Schools need more full-time support staff, more money into EAs for time before and after school to plan. What we need is more support staff in schools and more EAs or longer EA hours. Okay, and that's the big one, more hours for the EAs. And it's not the huge cost that everyone thinks it ought to be. Go over to page 34 of the budget, and you're going to see that in our last round of bargaining, we negotiated an extra hour per week for over 100 EAs. Now, the number on page 34 says 193,000 was a cost, but we believe that's a little over the top conservative estimate. But we can get into the details on that later. So that extra hour brought the lowest hour EAs up to 27 hours. Not a bad start, but I know we can do a lot better than that. This board can get them to 29.5 hours a week with minimal effort and minimal impact on this budget. And I'll tell you at the end how we believe that's possible. But first though, let's just see what you would get. More importantly, what our schools are going to get if all elementary school EAs were 29.5 hours a week. Because right now, the EAs we're talking about, they're just paid from when the bell rings, their dismissal bell. But can you imagine that EA had 15 minutes before the bell? They could take off their coat, talk and plan with the teacher about the upcoming day, maybe get some things ready, set things up, and they could actually be there to greet the children with a big smile on their face and then walk through the door. And that is a really good way to start the day. What about 50 minutes after dismissal bell every day? EA could help with the slow-moving students. They could attend meetings with the teacher or principal. Maybe they could do after-school supervision, crossing guard duties, whatever that particular school needs, because every school is going to have its own different needs. Noon hour supervision, of course, is a big one. So right now, each noon hour supervisor has to watch between 100 and 125 students. But right now, a lot of them are they're being asked to do one-on-one supervision at the same time and do the best you can. I don't know how you can do one-on-one supervision and also watch over 100 children. It's impossible, right? You can't do it. So if every elementary school EA was 29.5 hours a day, everybody could be doing noon hour supervision. The really sad part is that most of your EAs, they're already starting early and they're already staying late. And this is what unpaid work is. And unpaid work is not allowed in our collective agreement. So this means as an employer, NOPS is taking advantage of their most precarious employees. And they're also predominantly female. This treatment of our EAs and who are also caring for our most precarious students is just plain wrong. And as an employer, we believe that NOPS is better than that. All right, how do we fix it, right? We can sit here and whine about it, but we got some answers for you. The money's there. So the money's there. All this board needs is the will. Okay, so what's the cost of this? So if you go by this budget's very conservative estimates, it'll be about $470,000. We believe the actual cost is about $350,000, and we know how you can get there. So on page 25 of the budget, there's just over $100,000 in lift improvements. So there's a start. 2, let's take that new management position, please. We don't need more bosses in the board office. We need more resources in our schools. So let's play that one conservatively. And let's say that a fully loaded salary is about $130,000. So now we're at $230,000. We're really starting to get close now. Now you can look at the savings from those 3 full-time equivalencies that CUPE's losing. Probably about $150,000. So now we're already at $380,000, which is more than enough. And we haven't even touched on the surplus. And I know, page 51, it says, it's recommended for only using in extremely emergent situations. And that's fine, because we're not suggesting to use all of the surplus, right? But we can use some of it, right? Multi-million-dollar surpluses coming year after year, and your school's got to scrape for nickels and dimes. Now, it wasn't right 10 years ago, it wasn't right 5 years ago, and it's not right today. Yes, we have to save for a rainy day. We have to have some money for contingencies, but we can also provide the proper funding for our schools to deliver that world-class education that we already provide. See, I actually think this board right now is in a really enviable position. We had many boards pay lip service to support staff in the past, and that's all it was though. It was only talk. But you guys can take these 2 ideas and you can make all elementary schools EAs 29.5 hours a week, and you can lessen that wage gap some. And you will actually be taking true action. You will have turned this kind of gloomy status quo budget into a game-changing budget. And your employees and your students, they deserve nothing less than that. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jeff. Any questions, Jeff, for Jeff? Charlene. I see Chantal.
Thank you. I'm not going to be able to put my camera on. So I guess two-part. First, I need information. If you could please repeat the 3 places where you believe that we could find the money in this budget. And then my second part of that is, I believe what I heard was increasing time for elementary EAs. Is it just elementary, or are you looking for increased time for secondary EAs as well? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I mean, of course, we want to help all of our EAs, but right now we are focusing on our most precarious one, which are our elementary school EAs. As far as where we think the money can come from, over $100,000 in lift improvements, the new management position that they're proposing, and the savings from the 3 full-time equivalency positions that CUPE is losing. We haven't even got into the surplus. You can dip into that a little bit. We know you're not going to dip into it all. We get that. But there's money here. It's like I said, these numbers are conservative, and we think that we can get there.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any follow-up, Charlene? Okay, no follow-up from Charlene. Question from Chantal.
Hi, sorry, forgive my ignorance, Jeff, and through you, Chair. Jeff, I'm trying to find the 3 FTEs that we're losing from CUPE. Do you have, I'm sorry, I'm looking through my paperwork and I'm like all over the place, jumbled here. I've got like 2 different budgets going. Which 3 FTEs are being lost? Are they just not being replaced, or what page is that on? Sorry.
So, through the chair. So some of them are coming from the Indigenous Target Fund. We're losing there. But if you go to, I guess it's page 48. At one point, it actually looks like we're losing. Oh God, sorry. At one point, it kind of looks like we're losing between 6 and 8, but some of that is one-time funding. So I'm not counting those positions, right? Just the way that our math, and we're also adding a CYFSW out of operating funds, right? So our math comes out at 3. We've had a meeting with management. We said that was our number, and I wasn't told that was wrong. So that's where I'm coming out with the 3 FTEs.
Okay, great. That kind of jives with what I'm understanding as well from some previous conversations as well. But I can't speak more to the Indigenous side of the EA's part, but thank you for clarifying that, Jeff. I appreciate that a lot.
Okay, and do you have any kind of a follow-up, Chantal?
No, my follow-up is just a comment and say thank you for bringing, for coming here and presenting and explaining your positions on this, and doing some homework and finding us some money for that, Jeff. Appreciate it a lot. And you know, I didn't say to Jeremy, but these are definitely things that are on our radar. So thank you for bringing it up, and thank you for that.
Yeah, and a comment also in the chat from Mark Robinson. Thank you, Jeremy and Jeff. We're hearing a lot of parents asking for more counselors and EAs. Mental health is important and on our radar. So yes, anyway, you've been around this table long enough to know that we do the best we can, and we want to work together, and we'll see what we can do. All right, so thank you, Jeff and Jeremy, both for your presentations. I'm going to move on to the next portion of our meeting, which is senior staff reports. Mark Walsh, Secretary Treasurer, Transportation Administration Fee Consultation Results.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone, and much appreciation I want to express to Jeremy and to Jeff for bringing their perspectives forward. Very much appreciate having the opportunity to speak with them about the budget and the challenges that we face. So Just a little bit of background on the feedback. And Dale, I don't know if you want to kick us off on what we heard, or if you want me to go high level and you're here to help with some questions.
Oh, I can present on the findings if you'd like to just have a little bit of introduction. That's fine.
Well, I think I may have captured it, and it's unsurprising that there was not a great deal of support for the concept of a administration fee for busing that in our consultation. Perhaps heartening though is there was I think a general understanding of the issue that we have and a general understanding of a desire to fix it. And one of the things that you'll see in the recommended motion is a slight alteration from what we initially were contemplating with respect to the direction that we were going to go. Dale, maybe you can talk about the feedback, or maybe just wait for questions. What's your preference?
How about I jump in with the feedback and give the people at home and our committee a look at what's been said? Sure, I'll jump in. Okay, Karen, if you don't mind taking over producer duties, I'm going to share my screen here and get started right away. I'm going to throw myself on screen and then I'll pass it over to Karen. Let me just share my screen. Okay, on the screen you should see our dashboard, and this is the Thought Exchange dashboard. And before I get into that, I wanted to let everyone know that we had left this consultation open for 2 weeks, and we did that at the beginning of April, and we received just around 40 emails, and then we also received a significant amount of feedback on Thought Exchange, and that seems to be the favorite of the community. And so in that Thought Exchange, 368 participants took part. 345 thoughts were left, and just under 5,000 ratings were also left as well. Now, of that 368 participants, I'd like to break down just who participated in that in the Thought Exchange. And so, if you see on your screen right here, is one or more of your children a registered bus rider in the district? And 65% said yes. So that equated to 224 people who participated in the Thought Exchange. 35% of the people that participated did not have a child as a registered bus rider in the school district. These are important numbers, and I wanted to share those with you right now, just so that gives you a glimpse of the feedback that we're going to see in just a few minutes. The second one I wanted to share is, if your child is a registered bus rider, do you reside outside of the walk limits? So these are what you would call the eligible bus riders who live outside of those walk limits. So 58%, or 194 of those participants or rather who participated, has a child who is a registered or eligible bus rider. The next one here is, if your child is a registered bus rider, how often do they ride the bus on a weekly basis? And the majority had said that 3 to 5 times was the amount of times that their child would ride on that bus, which equated to 57% on the Thought Exchange. And then the last piece I wanted to share with you here in terms of participants is, if your child is a registered bus rider, do they ride? And the question was, do they ride in the AM, the PM, or both AM and PM, or neither? And the majority who responded said both AM and PM, that's 46%. But if you also look at the second highest number there, so 114 of the participants, so which equated to 35% of the participants did not have a child who is a registered bus rider. So it was nice to see that there were participants who took part in the Thought Exchange who it may not have affected them directly, as their child didn't have an eligible bus rider, or rather a bus driver or bus rider in their family. So it was nice to see that they participated in that Thought Exchange. I'll click on this right here. And this is the top thoughts in terms of eligible riders. And so these are the ones, so what we're talking about here are the parents who have a child or children riding on the bus. And the top thoughts here, you can see it on the screen. Maybe I'll share the top 2. The first one, I don't think we should have to pay another fee for our children to get to school and back home. We already pay taxes into our schools and transportation. Furthermore, BC is continually giving us more and more fees while increasing our taxes and cost of living. Bus service should be provided to get to public school. The second highest, charging the kids who need transportation to and from public funded schools is ridiculous. Most of these kids have no other means of access to the school. I should also point out too that I did mention that we received around 40 emails. The majority of those emails that we received, the voice of those participants, or the feedback rather, was that they did not agree with a fee increase, or rather an administration of a fee to ride the bus. The next report would be for courtesy riders. So these are typically the bus riders who live out rather within the walk limits, but are registered for a variety of reasons. One in particular would be that there is a bus route that passes by their house, and so they could easily just jump on that bus, provided there is room on that bus. So the top thoughts for this one, the top two: make registration for AM only, PM only, or both an option. A good part of riders only need one way. Okay, good feedback there. The second one, we need the bus service, and if it ran at the early dismissal time on Monday and Friday, like it used to, my child would take it 5 days in the PM. Walking home across 2 highways from school is unsafe. And again, that's from our courtesy riders. And the last report that I wanted to share with you, these are for our non-riders. And so that was that group that I was telling you that participated in Thought Exchange that didn't have an eligible bus rider, or rather just a registered bus rider in their family. And you can see the difference in feedback here, and I'll share the top two. It seems only fair considering many students don't qualify for district bus and parents have to pay monthly for public transportation. Could allow for more bus routes that could allow other children to have access to safe transportation to school. And the second one there, even within walk limits, with the number of problems, I don't feel safe allowing my child to walk. It is 2 city buses to the school. I would gladly pay $25. And where that $25 came from is directly from the big question. And if I may just scroll back up here, when we asked people to participate in the Thought Exchange, the question was, what are your thoughts on the district's consideration to address operational efficiencies through the implementation of a $25 annual registration fee for all registered bus riders? And that overall, in a quick few minutes scope, is what we had seen through the email and through Thought Exchange feedback. Thank you.
Always takes me a minute to unmute my mic. Sorry about that. Mark, how?
Yeah, Chair, I don't know if you want to trustees to ask Dale questions on the feedback,
think so.
or if you would like me to outline kind of the alternative proposal that we have first, and then just answer questions generally.
Let's see if there's any questions first about the feedback. Anything that anybody didn't understand or wants to dig into a bit deeper. Anything specific to the Thought Exchange, Mark?
Hi, thanks, Tanya. Thank you for the thought process, Dale. Going over it really, and I've gone through it. In fact, I've gone through it so much I noticed there was a Russian response and a Chinese response. Were those translated and put? I have to ask because I'm just curious. Were those thoughts taken into consideration, and were they legitimate concerns or were they spam? Thanks.
Oh, great question. I believe how Thought Exchange works is that they take, oh, you know what, let me get myself on the screen here. How Thought Exchange works is that they offer, when people sign in, I believe there's an option to choose a different language. And then what happens, I think it just auto translates those options for us. So they don't get pushed off to the side and we never see them again. We do use that in our feedback as well. Yeah.
Super. Thanks, Dale. Thanks, Dale.
No problem.
Unmute myself there. Sorry, guys. Any other questions before I let Mark proceed? Okay, go for it, Mark.
Great, thanks. So what we did was we took away the feedback, and one of the aspects of the feedback that was, I think, relatively, well, it's all reasonable criticisms, but one thing that I think we took to heart was the idea that we have these walking distance routes. And I know this district provides busing for more than just students associated with walking routes, or distance, sorry, it's also associated with safety, special needs, etc. And the idea that, hey, you live within this distance and you're eligible, in our opinion, for bus or alternatively transportation assistance, and so therefore, we want to charge you this fee And so we kind of took a look at that and thought, well, wait a second, if we have a sufficient number of courtesy riders, which we do, we also have a number of riders that would be riding for safety reasons. So they're not technically courtesy riders, but they are within the walk routes. And so we thought, rather than applying the fee to the entire population of riders, we would recommend that we would look at a fee targeted at the folks that are inside of the walk routes generally and ride our buses, or outside of the walk routes, but for instance, courtesy because they attend school that's not their catchment and there happens to be room at this time. So what we've proposed is, rather than a $25 fee for 2,000 people, what we're proposing is a $40 fee for less than half that number, of course, with a fee waiver. The other piece is we've already sought folks to register for busing for next year. And so we thought it wouldn't be appropriate to apply a fee to a group that's already applied for busing. So what we're proposing is that it would only be impactful on students that apply, what's the date that we put, effective October 1st. So if you apply on October 2nd for busing, and after that, the fee would be in place. So largely the fee wouldn't really take impact until September 2024. The second thing we're going to do, and we don't need a board motion for this, is we are going to start more actively monitoring and policing the ridership that we have. So we don't have a ton of time and administrative power to be able to achieve this, but we're going to be more focused on this. So you're an individual, you have a Z card that we give you, you swipe once a week. Well, we're going to probably remind you that you signed up, you're taking a seat on a bus, and you're either not riding or you're riding on a very limited basis, and therefore the AP already envisions kids being taken off of those routes. Of course, we wouldn't do that without warning and conversation, etc. So the one strategy we're going to proceed with, and we will of course be communicating with the community about that because it is already in the AP. The second one, though, again, is a recommended board motion. The board doesn't need to move it. The board doesn't need to pass it, but we think that it's reasonable. It gives people essentially a year's notice that the fee will come into effect. It would have a waiver ability, and so that we think also is reasonable. The one piece that's probably controversial, again, is that there are some people that do ride that are within walking distance, but we would recognize that they're kind of safety-oriented busing. The problem that we found with trying to not have a fee for those students, but have a fee for, other potentially pure courtesy riders, is that we will be debating with hundreds of people whether they're safety riders or courtesy riders, and we think that the walk limits is a reasonable line. That combined with the ability to have a waiver, as well as a year's notice, as well as the fact that that we're going to be communicating with limited ridership this year, all combined for, we hope, to be a reasonable proposal to address the issue.
I keep having trouble unmuting. All right, but we have a motion here recommended that we put forward. Do we have anyone who would like to move it? Or actually, before that, are there any further questions for Mark based on what he just said? Okay, as soon as I ask a question, I'm going to seek a mover to the motion. Okay, Chantel.
Hi, thanks, Mark, for this. I just want to be clear here, and I'm maybe not going to talk about the motion specifically because we can ask more questions and discuss that a bit more when you move the motion. But when we had done this, we had said that it was going to be $25 annual registration fee for all registered bus riders. And now we're looking at $40 for those that are not in for those that are inside the walking distances. Why the change in cost or fee price?
Yeah, so through the chair, so the concept is again, we're cutting the fee would apply to less than half of the number that the original fee was going to apply to, and so the fee goes straight to the administration of the issue that we have, and so essentially that we thought that was a appropriate number without being too much, but still allow us to kind of have an administrative bang for the buck, so to speak, to be able to track. If it's too much, I mean, that was the thinking about the 25 seemed reasonable. We kind of added up the revenue about how that would support us. The 40 largely would kind of be an even proposal, just to a different distribution of people. So that's the thinking.
Okay.
Right.
And
Thank you, Mark.
Mike, do you have a follow-up? Actually, before I throw in my question?
No,
Nope,
I don't.
she's gone.
Thanks.
Okay, and my question mark was around the issue of waiving the fees. Or is that just gonna be, as we tend to, pardon me, do we have a scale that, what, do we look for, do we seek proof, or do we just take people at their word?
We would be taking people at their, sorry, through you to you, Chair. We'd be taking people at their word. We haven't done the legwork on how we would be collecting. We would assume we would do it through the school, and so we'll get a good sense the kids that are getting fees waived already at the school level are likely going to align quite clearly. But it would be an honor system.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to check that before I as part of my thinking process. All right, so we have a recommendation here that needs moving. If someone would be willing to do that, please. Because I don't think I'm allowed to. I need a mover. There we go. Thank you, Chantel.
Well, no one else was put it there.
I think nobody wants to have to read it out loud.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna read.
Have
this
you
one
got it
out
in front of you?
loud. Okay, I do. Through you, Chair, the Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District Number 68 Nanaimo Ladysmith institute a yearly administration fee, beginning with busing registrations submitted after October 1st, 2023, for all students who register for the bus who are inside of the walk limits as set out in Administrative Procedure 512, including students who are bused to specialized programming, with the exception of special needs, associated busing, and BCTEA related riders, and that staff include an update in the yearly transportation update to the board.
Thank you. May I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Leanna. Oh, thank you, Leanne. I saw you, but I saw you right after Leanna, so it was too late. Charlene, you'd like to speak to it?
Perhaps we should allow Chantel to motivate as the mover.
Oh, I apologize. Yes, Chantel, would you like to motivate?
Okay.
don't
Not
have
sure how to
to.
motivate this one. I think I'll pass on motivating it.
Okay, for sure.
I want to listen to others first. Thanks.
Yeah. All right, and now then I will go to Charlene.
Thank you. So I'm going to speak strongly against this motion. I appreciate the purpose and the work that went into it, and I fundamentally disagree with any charges by boards of education for busing fees. I know it has become common practice in various areas around the province, but it's something that I don't agree with. I think that when I'm making a lot of these decisions that have potential financial impacts on families, that I have to look at them through the lens of making sure that I'm either reducing or removing barriers to access to public education. And I feel like this has the potential to feel like creating a barrier for some families. I recognize the thoughtfulness that our staff have put into ensuring that there's the possibility of waiving the fees as necessary. But for me, I think ultimately it's about not having a barrier at all in order to support what I believe should not be something that's ever charged for families. So I'm speaking against the motion, and I will close with I'm a long-time supporter of the transportation department, and I really appreciate how tricky it must be to navigate planning these routes. Over the years, I've seen a lot of different versions of that. And so I don't want it to go without my thanks and acknowledgement to that department for the work they do, but I'm just not interested in supporting a fee for families. Thank you.
Next speaker is Mark Robinson.
Thank you, Tanya. I'm going to vote in favor of the motion, and it's partly because of the hard work that the Transportation Department has done. Mark certainly invested a lot of time, as well as other staff. But I'm going to reserve my decision for when it goes to the board, that I may not vote for it. I've gone through, a lot of the questions, a lot of the feedback. One parent says, I can barely afford to feed my kids, let alone dealing with how to get them to school. With the cost of living, another one says, with the cost of living, and this is a parent that does not use the transportation. While I'm not using this service, it's inappropriate to charge a fee with the extremely high cost of living. The families don't need another fee. And as Dale mentioned, Chair, that the vast majority of the feedback was against the implementation of a fee, but I'm going to vote for it so we can discuss it further as a board and have a decent second sober thought before it goes to the board, so we can decide whether or not to proceed, because ultimately it's the board that makes that decision. So for that reason, I'm going to support the motion to let it go through. I don't like the idea of charging a fee for public education, but it's not done yet, and I'm really hoping, and I appeal to all parents and all stakeholders to continue contacting trustees and continue reaching out to us and even people that might support it, please reach out, because I haven't heard a lot of people supporting it. I'd like to have a bit more time to chew on it, but I'm hedging towards no, but I'm going to vote for it so it goes to the board. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. All right, does anyone else wish to speak to the motion? And Trustee Morvay, Chantal, I see that you've put in the chat that you have a conflict and will be recusing yourself, abstaining from voting.
That's correct. I just realized
Okay.
that I would be affected by this, so I can't vote or speak on it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone? Yes, it can, Mark. Yeah, we could vote on it, yes. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to the motion before we call the question? Okay, seeing no further comments, I just was going to say, I'm going to say that I also am struggling with this because I see both sides. Now, my heart leans towards everything that Charlene said. And the other part of me wants more time and wants to not defeat this right now. And then at the board meeting, I may very well change my mind, because the question or the struggle I'm having with is I don't want to see us in a scenario where if we don't do this, a year from now, we're in the position of cutting more routes. And I'm needing some time to ponder the implications of where we're at. Mark.
Apologies, Chair, for interrupting during this time.
Of course.
I am actually just going to recommend that the board consider putting a motion to defer the debate and vote to the next meeting. The reason being, I just need to do a little bit of research on the issue of conflict that was just declared by the mover of the motion.
Okay.
And I wouldn't want the board to pass a motion or defeat a motion, frankly, that maybe shouldn't have been moved in the way that it is, but I don't have the answer at my fingertips. And so it's not pressing in the sense that it wouldn't be in place until October anyway. So maybe the board would consider doing that.
Yeah, I see that. Mark Robinson, trustee Robinson and trustee McKay have moved and seconded the motion to defer. I think your logic makes a great deal of sense. Does anyone else wish to speak to it? Okay, seeing none, anyone opposed to deferring this motion, please put it in the chat. Okay, seeing no opposition, the motion has been deferred. Or the recommendation, I should say, has been deferred. Thank you. Oh, point of order. Thank you, Chair, Charlene. What have I done?
Nothing, thank you. For perhaps point of privilege, I can't remember my lingo right now, but I would prefer to be addressed by my first name and not by title. That's what makes me
Apologies,
comfortable to
yes.
conduct work.
Apologies, yes. Alrighty. And Mark is gone. That's good. Not good, but Mark, you still there? I lost you for a sec. No, it's just my computer's doing weird things and I'm trying to keep it from shutting down us partway through the meeting. So if you lose me, that's what's happened. All right, so 8.2, active travel update.
Great, thank you so much, Tanya. And so you'll see the board will see a report on the various activities associated with active transportation or active travel within the district, working with our various partners as well as us individually at certain sites. Mr. Sabo is here this evening, who is leading the charge from the facilities ops side. Ms. Poulin is leading it from District Learning Services, but Mr. Sabo, I think, is capable of representing what we've done and answering any questions. The one thing, Pete, if I could just ask you to just delve a little bit deeper, that we talk a little bit about it, but just with respect to the status of Randerson, both active transportation as well as the kind of safe access to school, if I could maybe get you to dig a bit deeper into that before we turn to the board for questions about the memo.
Yes, thank you, and through the chair. On page 2 of the information sheet, staff list the items that we have carried out using our consultants on the matter that the board asked staff to look into. And so the consultant has reported back to staff through that process, and they've indicated to staff the fees and the deliverables with respect to the tasks. And so staff are now taking a look at that report, and we'd like to do a little bit more work amongst the staff and consider the appropriate next steps, given the recommendations from the consultants, such that we ensure that we're moving ahead in a way that reflects both the concern raised and the direction that we're looking to reduce traffic on school sites and increase school safety, and of course costs involved with not only operationally but capital for the different directions, and consideration as well for the future, understanding the potential opening of Rutherford and the impact of reduction of enrollments on Randerson Ridge. I'll pause there and see if there's any further questions.
Okay. Any questions for Pete? Okay. Oh, Mark.
Thank you, Tanya. Through you to Pete. Hi, Pete. Just a quick question about the motion that was made last board last term, with regards to the presentation that the Randerson Ridge Traffic Committee made. When the consultant and staff is going through the recommendations and the good work that the consultancy has done, how deep are we going in terms of some of the concerns that were raised by the Randerson Traffic Committee? Because I think it's kind of important to make sure that those concerns that were made through the motion are addressed.
Yes, thank you. And through the chair, and I think I can speak. I do have a senior staff member in facilities heading this project. That's Brian Hackwood. And I think I can say that the committee and the consultant have gone very deep into understanding the concerns of the Branderson Traffic Committee, and also taking the time to make sure that Jackie Poulin, Assistant Superintendent, and the current principal of the school, as well as the current PAC, have had a chance to hear all the perspectives and understand the impacts on the school. And so staff believe that we have turned over all the stones at this point.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for your work, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
Any other questions at this point? Okay, seeing none. Okay, thanks. Pete? Pete, you just, okay, Pete froze on me. And there's Mark. Okay. All right, so thank you for that update. And the next one is regarding AP 513 purchasing.
Thank you very much, Tanya. And so on page 17 of our agenda, we have an update on our administrative procedure with respect to purchasing. So in the document, or in the memo that attached with the new AP or the revised AP, are a variety of the highlights of the changes. You'll see that many of them are associated with inflation. So we're allowing a little bit more expenditure from a threshold perspective. This doesn't mean, of course, that we're not checking what's being purchased, but it's going to allow a little bit more to happen to align with the new reality of how much things cost. I just want to highlight one under spending authority. And so you'll see on page 17, we talk about the removal of the requirement for the board to approve unforeseen expenses or major construction projects over 100K. Now, 2 signatures from the Secretary Treasurer, Superintendent, or Deputy must be obtained and then reported back to the board. And so I'll give the example of Dover. So when Dover lost its electricity, this is actually what we did. Had we had a board meeting, we would have been additional days without electricity at Dover. And so it was reported to the board immediately upon kind of completion of the work as soon as we could to show where this went. Of course, major projects are always going to be coming through the board more generally. So when we get Ladysmith on the go, as an example, the board's going to be having a say in that. That wouldn't just be awarded because it's not unforeseen, as an example. And so another example might be at Hammond Bay. We have a change order that comes in, or another project, Pleasant Valley, we get a change order that comes in, and that we would be able to do that. And obviously most of the funding comes from the Ministry of Education, and we are in communication with them. And so the idea is not to take the board out of it, the idea is to kind of align realistic response practices with how we actually do business. I think the remaining items are relatively self-explanatory. This is already being updated relatively recently, and so it's always nice to come back to work out the kinks or where we're running up against issues associated with it. And I do want to thank Kylie Lowe and her team for leading the update of the purchasing piece. We're happy to answer questions, but I wonder, Ms. Lowe, if you have anything you'd like to highlight about the changes.
Thanks, Mark. I'll just say that, I mean, it's all in the memo here, but the majority of the changes relate to just how we're doing business now, especially with COVID. Before, we used to have companies actually dropping off bids for their tenders at the district admin center. Now that's actually being done electronically, and that wasn't reflected in the previous AP. So a lot of the changes relate to that. Otherwise, like Mark said, just working out some of the kinks from the previous update and trying to make it align better with what our actual practice is. So.
Okay. Thank you, Kylie. It was a very, these kinds of things sometimes confuse me, and this was very easy read. I appreciate it. Very good, easy, user-friendly language, so it made a lot of sense. Appreciated the glossary in particular, like all the explanation of all the different terms. Thank you. Any questions on this one? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to our 8.4, which is our third AP. Mark, Administrative Procedure 354, Risk Management and Third Party Promotion.
Thank you, Chair. And so the board is already aware. The superintendent indicated in an email to the board just to let the trustees know that this has already been put into place. And so what this was we really didn't have a mechanism by which we were kind of transparently telling the community why or why not something could be necessarily promoted in our system that it's not aligned with the school district. And so the perfect example is prom. So we have lots of parent organizations, parent volunteer groups that are organizing proms that are unaffiliated with the school district, although of course it's for the students at our various secondary schools. And for a number of years, we haven't allowed students or the groups to advertise in our schools. We haven't allowed them to, get emails sent out to tell kids where they can get information to tickets, etc. And so that was to protect the district from liability. And so what we did is we kind of dug deep a little bit. We did get a bit of external advice on how we can find a reasonable balance of access to activity, as well as protection of the district, as well as not kind of creating a new burden to solve an old burden. What I mean is you've got the baseball teams and the soccer teams that already do that kind of advertising in our schools, and we didn't want to create a new hurdle there. And so you'll see AP 354 as it's been brought forward. I have had four requests from schools, or not schools, from organizing groups, all associated with prom for advertising. We've approved email to go out as long as they align with the AP. We've approved posters in the schools as long, again, as they reference that not connected to the district. We have not allowed the sale of tickets, and we have not allowed our staff to kind of get involved to shoulder tap students. So those are we kind of half approved, half didn't approve a few requests. But generally, I think people are satisfied with the balance and it's in place, and we will bring it back if it's created too much of a burden, or if we get, say people that we may not want to be having advertised in our schools, as an example, are trying to access this. But
Okay, thank
so far,
you.
so good.
Any questions for Mark on this one? Comment, Chantel. And then Mark.
Make it quick. Through you, Chair. Thank you to all staff, to our superintendent, Scott Saywell and Mark Walsh, and all of the people involved in creating this and making it what it is. I really appreciate it, and I know that a lot of people in our community really appreciate it. I think it's a fair balance because we do have mitigate liability and privacy, all that stuff that goes with it. And I really appreciate the care that was taken here. Thank you very much for that.
Well said. Mark Robinson.
Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, I'll echo what Chantel said. Thank you so much, staff, for making this work for parents and for grads. Prom is a very special time of the year when you hit grade 12. I'd like to thank Charlene, actually, because if I'm not mistaken, Charlene mentioned right at the outset, right when the gates opened, about simply changing an administrative procedure. So thank you, Charlene, for that. I think high praise is in order for that regard, but all trustees that put effort into it, spoke with parents and worked on this, and staff deserve, is a good balance. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I also want to raise my hands to everybody who put their heads together in this and got a solution that I think will work. It's been a bee in my bonnet since before 2014, and I think I'm trying not to get emotional because I don't think you realize how much this is going to mean to kids, making it just that one step easier to know what's going on and to not risk missing out because you didn't hear about it somehow, because you weren't in the right, weren't in the in crowd that was really good at spreading the news, spreading information, or you weren't on Facebook or what have you. So good job. Okay. All right. And on that note, I will now move us on to 8.5. Very thankful from Leanna Pellegrin, very thankful that this is done. Thanks to all who worked too hard on this. Thank you, Mark. All right, Sean, Executive Director Sean Johnson, our Executive Director of Human Resources, is going to move us forward so I don't get further emotional on Safe Schools terms of reference.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. So this is the Safe Schools Committee terms of reference that I'll be talking about, and the Safe Schools Committee has reviewed these draft terms of reference and supports the approval of them by the Business Committee. These terms of reference provide the committee with purpose, scope, the ability to create subcommittees, which is important, I think, in getting the work done, a broad inclusive membership, schedule of meetings, a process, reporting obligations, and the requirement to review them annually, which I think is important because you do flesh out issues by working with terms of reference over time. So I will report that the committee's been working under these terms of reference to some extent throughout this year, and they seem to be working. And the committee will be following them and providing the board business committee with an update and any recommendations that the Safe Schools Committee has at the June meeting. And then the Safe Schools Committee will start off next school year, subject to approval of these terms of reference, by creating a work plan that will guide that committee's work throughout the year. So Trustees Morvay and Pellegrin also sit on this committee. I don't know if they want to add anything to this. Otherwise, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Leanna and Chantel, do either of you want to speak to this?
Definitely. And I hope Leanna speaks as well to this. I really want to give a big, huge kudos to Charlene and anybody else who worked on these terms of reference, because technically this was done before us. We just tweaked a couple little tiny things. It was really, really well done, I believe. And we've been basically following them because they were that good. So I hope that everyone will approve them. If there's any questions, of course, please ask. But I really appreciate the work that was put into this before we came on the scene. It's set a really good tone for the work that we've been doing this year, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mark, I see you have a question. Leanna, do you want to speak to any of this before I go there?
Sorry. Hi. I absolutely love this committee. I feel so excited and thankful and honored to be on it. I have served in the past on Safe Schools in a very different lens, and it hasn't been as juicy and fulfilling as this one. And it is definitely on the shoulders of everyone who put in the hard work. So I do recognize that. And Chantel's absolutely right. We walked into something that was kind of pre-done for us. And it's a wonderful group. It feels very, very safe. And it's my most excited look forward to meeting. So thank you very much.
That's wonderful. Good to hear. All right, question from Mark.
Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, this is heartwarming to see the amount of people able to contribute to it. I guess my only question would be what kind of, and I don't know who would answer this, whether it's staff or another trustee, Leanna or Chantel, what kind of discussion was in terms of student representation on the committee and involvement or feedback from them? everyone knows I'm kind of on that radar right now, so got to ask a question. Thanks.
I'm happy to start off answering that question, if that works through you, Chair.
Yep.
It's actually on our upcoming agenda. You know, one of the downsides of, and we have talked about it, but we've set aside some specific agenda time for our next meeting. I'd say one of the only downsides on this committee is that it works so well that we don't get through a huge agenda. We spend a lot of time on the things that come forward, but I feel like the work that's been done on those issues has been quite good. So, you know, that might be, I'm sure it will be something we'll be updating in June from that committee, because we'll be talking about it in the next couple of weeks when we meet.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. All right, so now we have a recommendation that needs to be moved. I'm going to exercise a little bit of discretion as the chair and ask if our two trustees who are on the committee would like to move that. Either one would like to move that motion, that recommendation for us. Chantel or Leanna? Jump in. Anybody, or, oh, you'll defer to Leanna. It's right there if you've got it to read.
Sorry, I just can't find it. Which page
You
is
want me to
on?
read it for you?
Yes, please. I'm on a tiny little phone.
Fair enough. The Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District Number 68 and I'm a Lady Smith approve the terms of reference for the Safe Schools Committee. So moved. So moved by Leanna. Seconded by Chantel. Do you want to second that? Seconded by Chantel. Any discussion? Seeing none. Speakers list. Charlene. Thank you. I got to give people more time to type.
Thank you. So I'm going to speak in favor of the terms of reference. I appreciate being lifted up this evening by a couple of different speakers. It was a lot of work over the course of the past year to create the terms of reference in collaboration with all of the members that were at the table and the previous board's interest in making sure that we were operating our board committees in a similar fashion, taking into consideration the unique needs of each board advisory committee, and that was really taken to heart in the creation of the basis of terms of reference. That said, both Chantel and Leanna brought new information and new thoughts to round out the final draft that's before you, and they deserve some credit for that. So I'd like to lift them up and just acknowledge that work that has been undertaken as well. And specifically with regard to the terms of reference, when we talked about having subcommittees, one of the main reasons we discussed having subcommittees for this committee was to ensure that when we needed student voice, that there was a safe, smaller group available in order to accomplish that. And often we talked about it in terms of the JEDI work that the district is undertaking, really getting into the nitty-gritty of personal stories for students and having a safe space in order to do that in smaller groups. And that was a really big push for why subcommittees is included in the terms of reference here as well. So that has been an ongoing discussion, and I look forward to hearing about how that goes in upcoming meetings from the Safe Schools Committee reports. So I'm speaking in favor of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlene. And I completely agree with what you just said. Some of the students we most need to hear from in that Safe Schools Committee are the students who aren't going to want to do that in a full, large committee, and will speak in the smaller, safer space subcommittee. So you're absolutely correct there. Yeah. So I also am in favor of this recommendation. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to it?
I guess I'm going to raise my hand
Yep.
here.
Yep.
Sure. I'll speak in favor of this as well. Obviously, it's a labor of love, and I'm glad to hear that everyone is supporting it and seems to be supporting it. So
Yeah.
Thank you for that trust and having me and Leanna chair that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important. This is from Leanna. Leanna, thanks, Charlie. It's so important that students have an option to speak to a smaller group in a safe and less intimidating way. Absolutely. This work is so vital. It's just as vital as anything we do on literacy or numeracy. And of course, our academics are vitally important too. But we're not just teaching brains. We're dealing with hearts here in our schools. So this is wonderful work. I'm sort of talking to give people a chance to see if there's anything else they want to say before I call the question. Okay, seeing none, call the question. Anyone opposed to the recommendation? Passes unanimously, as I think we all knew it would. All right, 8.6, Mr. Mark Walsh, our Secretary Treasurer, and Tanya Sutton, Director of Finance, third quarter report. And then, Mark, I'll just let you move right into the budget as you see it flow appropriately.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to answer questions as we go along. And it's very, I think, very useful document this evening as we flow right into the budget, because there's some dynamics that are useful and provide some context for the budget. So as we look at Q3, this is the time. I like Q3. I think it's probably the most useful document to see how we're doing out of all of the quarterlies. Which is the nerdiest financial comment I'm going to make this evening, I hope. But so what we have on page 38 to start is where we're at as a district after 3 months, or sorry, after 3 quarters. And so you'll recall that we are, our fiscal year is 12 months, but for the most part, our operations are 10-month business. And so we start in July 1. Obviously, we have very little expenditures in July and August, at least from an operating perspective. And then we really get going when our teachers and our EAs and show up in September. So right now, when we look at the quarterly, normally we're looking for revenues and expenses hitting, for the most part, about 70%. So if we've hit 77, out of our 10 most active months, we're looking pretty good. And so each year we do provide the comparators of where we were in the prior year. And so you'll look at 2021-22 on page 39. And I think I'm going to get Karen, if she could bring it up. We were, right where we needed to be with respect to operating grants. And then when we look at teacher salaries, we were sitting right at 70%. So exactly where you would expect. That number can fluctuate just a little bit depending on, the last paycheck of the month, etc. So last year we were exactly where we wanted to be, except for in substitute salaries. So substitutes would include TTOCs, but all other substitute replacement employees as well. So last year you could see that we were way above in our expense associated with it. And that's because we had a relatively high absenteeism versus what we budgeted. This year, you'll notice, if you look right next to substitute salaries, the amended annual budget is $5.6 million, whereas in the previous year, we were looking at $4.9 million. So we haven't had that many increased employees, and salaries haven't gone up that much. It's just that's where absenteeism is at, and that's probably the new normal. And so you'll see we've compliments to the finance team. They picked a number that's pretty much bang on. 70% of our, a big expense should be there, and we're hitting it. So looks like we budgeted enough. Unfortunately, we were hoping we were going to be a little over budget, or I should say over budgeted, under budget for that expense, but it doesn't look like it's going to be. So permanent elevated levels of absenteeism are maybe not permanent, but are here to stay for a while. So when we do look down the operating expenses and revenue, though, it is a little bit skewed from where we would normally want it to be. So Ministry of Education grants collected 73%, teacher salaries 73.3%. That would be concerning, except for the fact that we had increases in salaries without a corresponding amended annual budget adjustment. So if you'll recall, we passed the amended annual budget, and then all of a sudden the salary increases, including retroactive payments, were given to us by the Ministry of Education. So that's why our teachers have been paid, you know, that 73.3% is because really their salary, the budget for their salary should be a little bit higher. Luckily, of course, we've collected more money as well because the ministry has given us more money to pay for those salaries. And so that's why it almost corresponds, 72.9 revenue and 73.3% teacher salary. So long story long, we are in very good shape where we feel like we're exactly where we should be at this point in the year. Along all of those categories. Again, wish we were a little bit lower in the substitute world, but that is the reality that we're living in now. If you could turn to the next page, Karen, to page 40. And I think the really important highlight, and the highlight that's very useful for our budget, is if you look in the second column in the actuals at March 31st, and you go all the way down to the bottom where it says total operating expenses and net revenue versus expenses. So as we talked about when we produced the preliminary annual budget, that we expected that we'd be in the position of having some surplus by the end of the year. And so as we go into the budget discussions, we have not budgeted a local capital transfer. Had we budgeted a local capital transfer, we would be in a deficit position, right? Or a deficit budget position. But because we were predicting a surplus by the end of the year, we thought, again, let's look to that surplus in anticipation to kind of cover off that deficit. So not all districts do that. And I think that that might be one of the explanations on why, you know, we're feeling relatively comfortable in our financial position at this preliminary annual budget, despite some shifts. So what you can see up to Q3, we're in a surplus position of $992,000, and forecasting out, we think by the end of the year, that number should be about 1.2 million. And so that's almost equivalent to what we would be needing to replenish our local capital pot for Wi-Fi, for tech, for other various projects in the local capital fund. So all in all, we're exactly where we need to be at the end of Q3. I'm going to ask Ms. Sutton if she wants to jump on for a moment and see if she has any comments. And while she jumps on, I'm going to highlight, I know the superintendent has reported to the board that we had an audit. We did have great work being done at QQS, and I just want to really applaud the work that's being done there. Unfortunately, and as is typical with audits, we did lose some funding in some other audit areas of about $210,000, and then we had a small increase due to an error by the ministry. Again, relatively typical, not material, of $127,000. So overall, we did relatively well at the end of the day, and so not a ton of concern there. But Tanya, do you want to add anything before we move to questions on the quarterly?
Hi, Mark. Thank you through the chair. I would actually add that one of the pieces here, we're showing that we've received additional 5.7 million for the wage enhancements. And what we are also showing that we increased our supply and services line. So I just wanted to clarify that our average teacher salary is, we track our costs per month over the course of the year, and our average teacher salary, depending on the level of education and experience of our teaching staff, can fluctuate, plus they get incremental steps throughout the year. So it's a very complex line item to ensure that we're on top of. So originally in the annual amended budget, we actually were a little bit higher than we needed to be. So when we received the ministry money, we didn't need to put it all into the teaching category, which enabled us to actually increase our expense budget, which has increased a great deal with inflationary costs. So it allowed us to write that, which was very fortunate. So just wanted to point out why, if anyone was thinking that why would we see that line item when this was all related to salaries, that would be why. And just the other piece that where we see the 1.1 projected year-end position, and then the adjustments were suggesting that our accumulated operating surplus estimated for the end of the year, we would be in a position of 7.2, which is fairly similar to where we were last year. So very reasonable position for the district to be in. Thanks.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I actually, question from Mark, and then I'll put myself on last after, given the case. Mark Robinson. There he is.
Hi, thank you, Tanya. Thank you for the budget update. I have a quick question. We had some really good news come out just the other day. Mark, you sent us an email. Mark, you said it was not confidential. So I'm wondering how that would affect the budget, because first it was $100,000 to our favor, then $1 million to our favor, or something along those lines. Could you share with us and I guess the public the good news, because I'm sure everyone would love to hear it. Thanks.
Sure. So thank you. So specifically what the news is that for everyone, I guess, in Canada, I'm not sure how extensive jurisdiction wise it was, but there was a class action lawsuit against Microsoft associated with the way that they bundled products. That's the depth I'm going to go into where it came from. And what happened is that our district, obviously being a fairly sophisticated organization with very good business records, noted that we were likely eligible for money from that class action lawsuit. So we went and we did all that was required and gave the business records of the various products that we purchased. And what we ended up recovering was we recovered over $100,000 in cash in the form of a settlement, and which was cash that went directly to technology purchases. So ultimately, the impact on the district is that we didn't need to put additional local capital dollars in to replace that $100,000. So that's to the good. What you won't see reflected in our financial statements at this time, at least, and we probably are going to have a conversation what it looks like, is that we've actually now getting another $1 million as a result of the work that Learning Services and IT did together to get technology. But it's not, the second batch is not cash. The second batch is essentially rebates. So we buy the hardware or the professional development, both. It has to be Microsoft related product or Microsoft related professional development, and we will end up getting that. So we don't quite understand, we haven't determined how that's going to end up on a financial statement, if any. The expense, the revenue and the expense associated with the supplies should be reflected in this. But it's excellent news. Now, unfortunately, we use a lot of Chromebooks. It's not eligible for Chromebooks. We use a lot of iPads. It's not eligible for iPads, but certainly we'll be able to offset other expenses to move over. So it's good. And there's another kind of open request for additional funding from that suit, and we're applying. We don't know what the end result looks like.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you. Chantel has a question.
Hi, through you, Chair. Thanks, Mark, for this. Really good information. Just kind of need you to explain it one more time, if you don't mind. It's the local transfer, or the transfer of funds to local capital and accounting for capital assets purchased with operating funds. I didn't quite follow you on this. So it's 7 million surplus, but then we have to do a transfer of to local capital. Correct. If you could explain that just a little bit more, thanks.
So two different ideas. One is where we're projecting surplus for the year out of our operating fund. And can I just confirm whether my camera's on? I got a text to say that it's off. It is on?
It's on.
Okay.
You're on.
So the 1.2 million is where we anticipate our operating surplus for the year to end. So we spend $100, or sorry, we receive $100, but we only spend 99 in the, in the current fiscal year, and that's the 1.188020 number on page 40 of the agenda. So that's the single year number. And then the accumulated operating surplus. And Tanya, do you want to come on and we can just because this will be part of the budget discussion as well, outline what those numbers are. So I'll let you do that.
So through the chair, thank you. So yes, so the 1.18 million, it will be our annual operating surplus year-end position. 1 year operating position. So that then gets added to our accumulated ongoing operating surplus. However, the 1.18 million is prior to, because we have to present it a particular way, then we transfer the million that the board agreed to transfer. Instead of 2, we transferred 1 over to local capital. And then of that 1.18 million, there is also capital assets purchased using operating dollars, and we have to transfer that into capital expense. So it's showing those 2 items, leaving a differential of a negative 519,000 that goes against our accumulated operating surplus balance. We still ended the year in a positive position, but we did the transfer, we increased our assets, and there's our end result. Does that make sense?
And Tanya, could I just ask you to, well, if you have it at your fingertips, what at the end of the day does the 7.298419, what are the numbers that equal that? Like the benefits balance and...
Well, it's not actually that simple. The current surplus, and I might have confused things a little bit in the annual budget presentation. And if I have, I'm going to apologize in advance. So because the accumulated operating surplus is contingent on our year-end operating position, our current schedule of things that have been restricted and things that have been unrestricted and things that we have spent and things that we haven't spent on that list don't really come into play until we get to the end of the year, because some of those items will have been spent, some of them won't have been spent. Even the planned pieces that we put in the budget, they'll then roll into this year-end financial surplus position. So this is why this is presented this way for the board, is to say, if this was how we ended tomorrow, in September, we would come to you and say, this is the value of our accumulated operating surplus, for the board to then make decisions on how they wish to restrict or leave a balance of unrestricted for future mitigation for risk and operational needs. So this is more relevant to the board's conversations than page 79 of the annual budget document.
Thank you very much, Tanya and Mark. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. That I think I'm finally, yeah, I've always a little bit struggled with this one too. Anybody other with questions? I have a quick one, Mark. The increase in expenses in cost for absentees, does that suggest that we've had fewer failures to fill? Or am I making it? Yeah.
So indeed it does, yes. So it's been from the teacher side of things, it's been, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I think it's been a very good year for being able to fill. Not at all times, of course, but generally, and even trending in the last few months. And I don't want to say it because there's no real wood in my office to knock on, but even our EA replacement has been pretty good for the last number of months. And so I would suggest that some of it's got to do with that. Some of it just has to do with overall increased absenteeism and the Employment Standards Act change that allowed TTOCs to access access sick leave where they wouldn't necessarily have had it in certain circumstances, not all circumstances that before. So it's a combination of better filling, more absenteeism, and increased kind of right to sick time.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that's the Q3 report, unless anybody has further questions. And then I think Mark and Tanya are gonna slide into talking about the preliminary annual budget.
Yeah, so I think probably, and I apologize to everyone that's going to have to hear a bit of the presentation again, but I thought I might go through the document and hit some high points and hit some places where there might have been questions that have kind of stemmed from the last meeting. I know the idea was to come present the kind of first reading, so to speak, not that there's voting on it yet, but here's how it got put together, here's the highlights, here's the major changes to be aware of. And so now that we've had that, I thought what I would do is I would probably go through the presentation again, and then answer any questions in depth that we can for folks before next steps, if that's an appropriate direction to go, Chair. Okay. So a couple of things just to highlight right off the bat, and I definitely appreciate. I wouldn't suggest that we're attempting to be gloomy in our budget, but I would suggest that we're attempting to be prudent. Although generally, it's a good reminder. This is a good news budget for our school district and for our students. We called it sustaining momentum. Because we've really been able to, we think with some minor changes, maintain almost all the services that we're able to provide, at least the ongoing services from previous budget years. And so I know some of our district colleagues around the province are having struggles balancing their budget. And so we are in a fortuitous position. So I do want to recognize that. So some of the dynamics that I think are important to note: continued growth in our bricks and mortar schools, still heavy growth in our secondary side, some concerning softness in our elementary, even from what we thought were going to be conservative projections that we've built the budget on. We are underperforming those numbers right now to the point where we're actually going out to advertise for enrollment for elementary to remind people to come into the system. So we're watching that intently. Very positive international student numbers continue to show up in our district, which is actually against the grain from what's happening internationally as far as we are aware. So congratulations to the work that program is doing. Our online, our distributed learning school ICE, is coming back to kind of pre-pandemic levels, but pre-pandemic levels without any out of catchment or out of district students, as we won't be a provincial provider for those services. So we're kind of having a permanent kind of shrinkage of that program because of the limited numbers of kids that we can actually access. Some big investments in EA hours. Again, I think noted by Jeff that we negotiated table monies to put hours towards EA, so great there. The LIF has been increased, and every single additional dollar for LIF is going to EA hours, so great there. That's already combined. I think that's about 300,000 or more than 300,000 additional dollars. Large financial increases to the salaries of our teachers and hourly wage rates to our CUPE folks. 6.75% coming in. We don't know the impact quite yet on exempt. We do not have funding confirmed as of yet either, so we're waiting on that. So that's a glaring kind of question mark to this budget. No local capital transfer. So that just really need to highlight that was a choice we've made. The board, it's perhaps a risky choice. We think it's a safe one given what our Q3 has just said, but we can't just stop replacing our technology as it starts to wear out. So as long as we can predict a surplus, we're in good shape. But when that stops, we will need to address that issue in our operating fund. Some small tweaks in our CEF, our Classroom Enhancement Fund, moving a position to our annual facilities grant that we think is better defensible than the way that it was previously funded, and funding that facilities position is now getting funded from AFG. Those dollars will go to support recruitment and retention position in human resources to continue to hopefully win the failure to fill victory of getting people in place to support our kids. And finally, and I'm going to spend a bit of time on it, some relatively large shifts in our Indigenous education target that we think are going to permanently address the issue of us continuing having a surplus, as well as reallocating positions that we've had a lot of trouble filling, and finally ensuring that that particular targeted fund of dollars is audit proof and has the support of our Leaders for Learning. So I'll go over that in more depth when we get to it, but thought that was important. So if you could go to page 57, please, Karen. And what we're going to be bringing up is our assumptions with respect to enrollment. Our single biggest driver of funding is our base enrollment, our operating enrollment of students. And then, of course, our special needs, continuing ed, distributed ed, etc. So if we look here, you'll see, again, the 2022-23 year, we came in below our estimated number of students in our regular programming by 130 overall, largely as a result of missing our numbers in our distributed learning, which we probably overestimated, not realizing just how much of a boomerang from COVID that we would see, which did happen. We were still up year over year. It's just we were down from our projections, and so that was less funding. We're projecting overall being up 37 students. Remember, this does not include international enrollment. And then the following year, 99, and the following year, 51. I think they're all defensible numbers. As noted, we are a little bit concerned about elementary. If the elementary numbers we have on the books today for next year actually came in as they were, we would be actually negative growth as it stands. That's likely to mostly correct itself, but we're working hard. Special needs, and so you'll see slight declines in how many kids we're projecting. It's very difficult to project out multiple years, so we kind of picked that number, 2450, and then just brought it out 3 years. That's likely to be higher, and as kids come in, the supports are going to be there with their funding to support them. And then, of course, you'll see the distributed learning numbers that we're budgeting for there as well. So that's going to drive what we are doing. And so if you could go to the next page, please, Karen. And scroll down just to the graphic if you would. So we're showing our operating grant. Remember, operating grant is just that. It's not including our special purpose funds. You'll note that going up next year, making an assumption that, it's just taking this year's funding amounts for 24-25 kids. So there's no way it will be as low as 160 because, of course, salary increases will get bumped up, but because we don't know those numbers, we're basing off this year's numbers. And then finally, of course, 25-26 showing a decline. That's just related that we just don't know the level of special needs students that we have. And so if they are aging out and we're not replacing them, which of course we will, but we can't predict exactly what that will look like, we're going to have less revenues to support those students. So if you could turn to page 60, please. So summary of our revenue changes. You'll see a very robust increase in our operating grant that's associated solely with salary increases to our teachers and CUPE. If we get additional money for exempt, that will go up some more. I think it's really important though, and I want to highlight it every single time we ever talk about the budget, is pay equity. So this district in the 1990s, and apologies for everyone that's heard this, you will hear this just as many times as you will hear about how we need an ND, new ND. Pay equity in the 1990s, our school district was one of the progressive school districts across the province that worked with our CUPE union to come up with pay equity early. So of course, pay equity is the idea that we had female dominated positions that were of equal value to male dominated positions that were making less money. So our secretaries would be making less than our custodians, or as an example. So we worked very hard, and our predecessors worked very hard to right that wrong early. Then the government of the day in the late 90s said, okay, school districts, you guys need to get pay equity on the go. And so districts around the province did, and they sent their bills to the ministry. So our neighbors to the north, and I actually get like $2 million, and they're about 1/5 our size. They've been getting about that much money for 24 years. We've been getting $160,000, not adjusted for inflation, no increase for 24 years. So districts like Victoria, districts like Vancouver, districts like Qualicum, and good for them to get to pay equity, and glad that they get extra funds to support it. We didn't get any because we'd already done the work. And if you times 20 by, say, $2 million, think of the amount of money that our district has not received because of what is frankly an injustice. So ironically, coming from a place of justice. So I will get off the soapbox, but I think it's really important that our district understands the impact of pay equity that was had on our system in Nanaimo Ladysmith for 24 years. So if we scroll down, we're not seeing, we're seeing, again, some minor shifts and changes. You'll see we're getting less money from our partners at the CSF. That's related to the fact that some of the funding that they give us to support their students at ND is going to be out of the CSF or CEF, Classroom Enhancement Fund. You'll see increases to our investment income. You'll see minor tweaks and changes with respect to revenue. So that should be no real big surprises with respect to that. If we go on to the 61, please, Karen. So we're seeing the kind of highlights of the revenue changes that we've built the budget on. And if you go to 62. So now you're going to see the ins and outs of the expense changes. And so, for instance, if we had something that we're funding out of restricted surplus, that's all gone. $1.8 million, that's going to go without it. Here's the cost of CUPE and teachers. Trustees automatically get a bump based on CPI, based off of our policy. That's now reflected. You'll see the shifts and changes throughout. Nothing really major that I was going to highlight, just to remind you that that's, I think, an important page for you to be aware of what's happening. I do, again, though, want to be very transparent. At the very bottom, the second last line item there, you'll see staffing transfer to Feeding Futures Fund, secondary cafeteria program. So we're receiving $1.5 million, or sorry, $1.6 million from the Feeding Futures Fund, and it was completely appropriate, as we've been given instructions, to align what we're already doing with respect to food with that program. And so, for instance, we'll have $1.1 million that's still there to be expended, just sitting in a supplies budget while we plan what that program is going to look like. However, we have a whole bunch of people already employed by this district associated with food that are now being charged to that particular fund. So important to be very transparent about that. And if you go to page 63, please, Karen. So here's just an area, and I want to be, can you scroll down just a little bit further? Because it's associated just with a couple of changes from the document that you saw previously. So in our Indigenous target, you can see that we've had significant surpluses year in and year out for definitely 5 years and perhaps longer than that. So what the idea of this fund is that we get money. It's to support, cultural and Indigenous supports for Indigenous students that are self-identified. And so we can only spend these dollars on those targeted needs that fall under the guidance document associated with Indigenous education. And so if we have a position, for instance, and this happened to us, and this is one of the shifts, we had a couple of positions that we really had a hard time filling, or when we filled them, people just moved on, and then we had this gap. And so normally if we have a teacher that doesn't get filled or an EA that doesn't get filled, that money just flows into our general revenue. That does not happen in our Indigenous education target. That flows right and it stays as a surplus. So what we've done is, working with Leaders for Learning and led by the department, have realized that year in and year out, what we would do is we would add additional FTE to our secondary support teachers, as well as add temporary time to our Hulkaminam language cohort. And what would happen though is every year you'd go, okay, great, temporary money is gone. So that position, hopefully we'll be able to fund it in September, but for now we can't. Or, hey, a 0.7 teacher and secondary, you're a 1 this year, but you won't be a 1 next year. For now, hopefully we'll be able to top you up in September, but we have to wait. So if you're this person bringing this valuable experience of supporting kids, and you look across the street and you say, well, that school's got a 1.0, that's what I want now for consistency, we could lose those people. And so what we've done is we've removed 2 positions that could largely go unfilled or are very difficult to fill, and reallocated it to those teaching areas. We've also taken a what was supposed to be a temporary outreach position, reallocated that to be a CUPE resource coordinator. And so that's just kind of a like for like move. But the big one though is we also realized that we were funding 2 community youth workers out of that fund. And what we've done is we said, well, we think it's going to be difficult if we're audited defending them. They're doing great work. There's no question there. But the difficulty, of course, is that it needs to meet that target. And so what we've done is we've moved one of those positions, and you'll see the note at the bottom of the page. Karen, if you could just scroll down just a bit. You'll see that one of them has been moved over to the operating fund. You're not going to see it in this document, but it's coming from contingency dollars that our learning services folks are going to be reallocating for that purpose. And then hopefully if we have a surplus, we might be able to replenish that. But then there's one position that's not reallocated. So I think we've gone over most of the other aspects of the budget, but I think that's really the highlight. Although I am going to get you, Karen, if you could, to turn to page 25. Oh, sorry, 69 of the agenda, 25 of the budget package. Apologies. So I noted at the beginning that LIF is going up significantly. So you'll see it's jumping from 498 to 604. And I think it's worth repeating that back in 2019-20, we got $485,000. That money went to support extra hours for our EAs, and essentially an hour a person. But what happened is the value of the number of EAs and their wages went up in 2021 or 2021, 21, 22, 22, 23, but the amount in the lift didn't really keep up with that, particularly the high numbers of EAs that we have. And so this year is essentially a catch-up year. So if you scroll down just a little bit, Karen. So last year we were able to support 264 EAs with that time. This year we're able to support absolutely everyone with that time. So what that means is not that the board is spending money anywhere else. It just means that Ms. Steele's contingency budget is going to be not having to subsidize the LIF. So all of the additional lift funds are staying in EA hours. That just means that there'll be more EA hours. And then I'm going to turn to page 76, if you could, Karen. So the summary and the changes of FTE, I think, is pretty important. This year is a little bit more complex than normal because we've done a bunch of interfund changes. So for instance, we had a position that was funded from special purpose that we're moving to be funded from the operating fund rather than special purpose because we think it's more appropriate there than just funding out of Link. Then you'll see more kids in secondaries means more secondary FTE to support them. Same dynamic in elementary. I think I noticed or noted that our ICE staffing is going to be going down because the number of students enrolling is going down. So a lot of those things that align just automatically are there. You'll see that changes we talked about from the feeding that are moving to the Feeding Futures Fund from the operating fund, and so they're there. The one-time FTE removal is there, and then if we scroll down, seatbelt project, that's just money that's now completed. Surplus funds for the cleaning protocol, money that was one time. Short-term clerical money that was one time, as an example. The bus driver FTE between funds, what we're saying there is that we have BCT funding to support some of these folks. And then a variety of shifts. Ultimately, what we're looking at is that mainly in the Indigenous target is where we're seeing that kind of net loss of positions with respect to CUPE. So we see the reallocation of 2 COIFSWs, that's actually going to be a net of 1. And then the outreach position is being directly replaced with the district resource coordinator. And then you'll see the ICSSWs that are just not being replaced. We had a chance to look through the last 6 years of changes to our EA and our preliminary annual budget. And so, for instance, last year, the number was negative 11.26. In 21-22, negative 4.757. In 2021, negative 8.808. 19-20, negative 5.818. So this year is actually probably it's really one of our better years. And that's including the fact that we have temporary funds coming out. So there's of course, it's concern whenever a position is permanently reallocated, but we hope we've kept that to a minimum. Then if we go to page 78, it's important that we understand our risks, just to repeat them. So local capital, we've talked about that transfer, of course. International student program, good news is the strike is already over. We're continuing to see interest, but if something got in the way of our international program, of course, we've tried to budget a lot more generously to our schools in springtime to support those students. If they didn't show up, we have a financial risk. Exempt compensation review, as noted, we anticipate funding from the government, but if it doesn't come, or that doesn't come in full, then the board's going to have some very tough decisions to make with respect to exempt and principal compensation. Our replacement costs continue to be elevated, and so as we get better and better and better at filling all positions, then we are going to be tight on the replacement cost. And then finally, if you can scroll down to the next page, Karen. We're going to be talking about Rutherford next week, and so we're going to have to be talking about, if the board's going to be reopening it, setting aside some dollars to cover the potential impact on both operating and capital expenditures associated with that decision. And then finally, if we just go down to our accumulated operating surplus position, I'm going to get Tanya just to jump on with me so we can clearly spell out what these numbers are looking at. And so when we look at restricted, you'll recall that restricted items are going to be items that are already there for a specific expenditure purpose. So the board has supported additional staffing in some area. So that becomes restricted. Tanya, do you want to take this over, or do you think you did the job in the quarterly sufficiently?
I think we unconfused everyone, so I feel like through the chair, if we can just not go here, that I think I've already cleared this up. So I think the other document tells the story that the board needs to see. So if that's reasonable, that would be my recommendation. And apologies for the confusion.
But I also do want to be clear, though, that we do keep a contingency amount of approximately $1 million. And that number has been relatively stable year to year to year, both in the event that we overshoot our enrollment and we need to pull back, or if we can't pull back staffing from a school, as an example, or alternatively, we have no more money, but we have more kids come in and we've got those numbers there. So we do keep a contingency that's quite clear. The other note that I think is important, and it's right there, associated with the district premium balance. So in the past, districts didn't report this number on their financial statements, or not all districts did. And so what this is we put enough money to pay for our various, responsibilities associated with, teacher exempt and CUPE benefits. Now, we though keep it relatively robust. So if we all of a sudden come in and everyone in the district got massage, to the maximum amount that they were able to, and it doesn't happen, but if it did, we would then have to take from our operating budget to replenish our benefits pot. And so by having a surplus or a balance in our benefits, that's a reasonable number. That's a kind of prudent financial mechanism. We've drawn it down fairly significantly over a couple of years because it was creeping up a little bit more than it needed to be, but we are very comfortable with the number that it's at. Of course, if we ran out of money and we needed access, it, we could, but we think that it's a very reasonable number sitting in that particular balance right now. So those are the highlights, to make a long story long, but happy to answer questions, and maybe Tanya, you can stay on and we can tackle them together.
Still muted. There we go. Now I'm unmuted. First question from tonight is from Charlene.
Thank you. Just have to bring up my notes here. So perhaps this is less of a question, but really more a component of the board's discussion on the budget and thoughts based on my experience. Starting with thank you to Mark, Tanya, Kylie, the finance department. I know very well how much work goes into these documents, and they look very well put together and everything. You make it seem really easy on budget time of the year, but I know how much work goes into that, and I just want to acknowledge that right out of the gate this evening. So thank you. When Mark was talking about Indigenous education targeted funding, he mentioned Leaders for Learning. And for me, I think it's really, really important to highlight our responsibilities as board members around that funding. Leaders for Learning drive the decision making. And when you're bold enough as a district to be the first district to identify truth and reconciliation as a board goal, and then to follow through with it, creating policy frameworks and taking action, what that looks like in a meaningful way is by ensuring that when you have a group like Leaders for Learning providing you with advice, that you listen and follow the advice that they're providing you. That is reconciliation. And so when Mark shows us the changes that are happening in this fund, it might seem like there's loss, but it's also driven by the Leaders for Learning to support the Indigenous students that they are here to represent and give us advice about what do we do as an organization to make sure that we're acting in the best interest of those kids. And I know that that could be a little bit controversial because the changes aren't necessarily easy, but those targeted funds are meant for particular students. And in order to walk reconciliation truthfully, we need to listen to the guidance that we're provided when we're asking elders, knowledge keepers, and education representatives what to do with those dollars. And so I just really want to highlight that for the board. You know, these are our goals at the board that staff are bringing forward. These are the actions that'll meet your goals in your strategic plan with the guidance and consultation, depth of consultation as well. This is not just, what do you think? There's very concentrated conversations and discussion that happen around the budget with that Leaders for Learning group. And so I really want the board to understand that anything that's in this targeted area is really important for us to listen to the advice on, because it comes with some really meaningful advice that we've received from the Leaders for Learning group. So that's all I have to say on that. I'll put myself back on the speakers list for something completely different, but that was very important for me to share with trustees this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlene, and that was very well said. Is there anyone else who would like to be on the speakers list? Now, Charlene, I know you want to come back on the speakers list. Do you mind if I just ask a question that's been percolating for me before I do that?
Of course.
Thank you. My question is, and I kind of know the answer because Tanya and I had a bit of a conversation, but for example, the dollars that we're now getting for the food program where we've now been able to reallocate money because we're getting targeted funding around foods. I guess my first question would be, is this like a 3-year thing or is it year to year? Do we know anything about that?
Yeah, so we understand it to be 3 years of funding at minimum, but I think the intent is for it to be a permanent fund. Of course, they won't guarantee it, but 3 years is the message that we've received.
Okay, and my follow-up to that would be, suppose that there's a new government in place in 3 years, and at the end of that 3 years, they say, you know what, we don't like this. We're not going to do it this way anymore. How much notice do we usually get do you know, is there sort of a sense that you could give me of how much notice we might get if they did that so that we can plan? Do we know?
I would assume that every no matter whose government, they're going to understand that it takes a bit of time to make adjustments to a district. However, I mean, when the funding model changed in 2002, I can't recall how much time there was, but that had a major impact that was immediate. So,
okay. I mean, I'm not particularly concerned about it right now, but it's just always the kind of thing in the back of my mind that I always wonder about when we move things between operating and, you know.
Well, what I would suspect would occur if there was to be a change, the most logical one would be to get rid of the target. So just roll the dollars into the block if that was to ever happen. And then all of a sudden the board has a real choice on its hands about whether it wants to take that flexibility and move it somewhere else to a different priority or maintain supporting the priority that it was.
Okay.
But we don't know at this point.
Okay. And now I see Chantel with a comment/question.
Hi, thank you, Tanya. So for you, Chair, to Mark and Tanya, and everybody listening, can you hear me? Okay, great. I wanted to highlight the fact that the government has also increased the funding to designations this year, and Indigenous education and a few other things. Some of it's over 10% of an increase in what is allocated to designations and Indigenous funding. And I think that's really, really exciting. It's the largest increase I've ever seen, I think, in history. So I'd like to acknowledge that. If you could explain one more time for me and those listening, as like we've decided that this is the amount that we would like to spend towards EAs, and yes, I'm gonna do what what Jeff has been fantastic at doing as well is talking about this a lot is when we get to the September 30th numbers and we see that the numbers are higher and we know, okay, we need more EAs. How does that work? If we could just spell it out for everybody involved, not completely, because I realize it's a complicated process, but I know that there's a lot of people interested, and it's a great reminder for myself as well. But thank you very much.
Tanya, do you want to talk about that for a moment?
Sure, through the chair. So first I will start with, we have recently updated the way that we allocate EA hours, and that's one of the line items in the budget that is visual is under the EA category. Our actual, generally speaking, in the past, when we go from the amended budget, 1 year's amended budget to the next year's annual budget, we reduce our EA staffing because we've made assumptions to be careful and not find ourselves overfunded in our designated areas, because we don't know how many students are going to show. We don't know if they're going to show up with designations, without. So from the preliminary perspective, we pull some of those back, cohorting students through, and then we reduce the staffing and add it back in September. We've revised how we provide the staffing out to fund our EAs for our designated students by also providing hours for unfunded categories. And this is one of the reasons why there's such a small shift this year, is the number of hours from the amended budget to the number of hours for the annual budget for our general EA staffing for school-based student support has changed by about 7 hours. It's so minimal. And that's a huge happy news. So what we'll see now is we've got our funding is based on a projection. Come September 30th, depending on the number of students that actually hold designations, we will then receive a differential of funding, higher or lower, whatever that looks like. But our number of students that hold designations per our 1701 count will also update the number of hours that are provided for each of those student designations or staffing in the schools. And that, as generally we would never reduce that, but if there are more students in the system, then more hours will be provided for EA supports. I'll stop there, hoping that has answered the question.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it has, and it's basically saying like we are looking at a lower enrollment, but keeping basically staffing levels sort of the same, with a little shift in that. Of course, we all know we could always use a lot more EAs, but thank you very, very much, Tanya, for that explanation. I appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
And now I'm going to go to Charlene.
Thanks, Tanya. So I think you might have partially answered my question. I just want to make sure that I understand it when we were talking about the third quarterly report. But my question is on page 59 of the agenda package around preliminary operating grants. So I remember last year during budget time, we saw some numbers that were quite a bit higher in our unique student supplement categories. And I remember a conversation at the table saying, wow, those numbers seem really high. And I feel like this year we're seeing an equal adjustment the other direction. So what I'm wondering, and I think you talked about it a little bit, is that a result of our ministry audits? Or is it students that are graduating? Is it a combination of both? What is it that's adjusted those numbers, decreasing, you know, almost all the way across really our special needs categories?
So basically what we've done through the chair is, and how we look at these numbers is there's a bunch of different analysis that goes into these. Some of them are historic trends of numbers of students under these categories, but also looking at the current cohort of students. And so taking that current cohort of students and moving them through the system. So for each one of these categories, saying what are the numbers from K to 12, and what are the outgoing Ks or outgoing to 12, sorry. And we don't know what those incoming Ks will look like. So when we take the current body of students and we remove the grade 12 designations or the grade 12 Indigenous students or the grade 12 ELL students, we're then left with a different number, and generally speaking it will be less because we're not accounting for kindergarten until September because we have no idea what that's going to look like. And as Mark indicated earlier in the presentation, our kindergarten numbers right now are substantially lower than where we've projected. Overall, our elementary numbers are low, but our K numbers are really low. So we are doing a lot to get parents to get their students enrolled. But if we were to suggest that kindergarten numbers are the same year over year and we make a miss, these are significant funding sources. And if we miss, we'd be in a bad place. So we are careful, and then we will add supports in the fall, depending on whether we meet these targets or whether we exceed these targets, which generally speaking, we will.
Amazing. Thank you for that answer. That helps me clear up what I was seeing and remembering. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Any other questions? I know that it can be hard to type, so I'll just give it a bit longer. Okay, I'm seeing nothing. So I think that concludes our business around the budget, correct? Mark, you've got it. You've done everything you need to do. You wanted to do. All right. And that was the last of the items on the agenda. So now I just kind of see if I haven't missed anything. Nope. There's no correspondence and no unfinished business. We have no new business and no for information. Do we have any questions, Karen? No questions. Seeing that, we have reached the end of our agenda, and I am seeking a motion to adjourn. Motion from Mark Robinson. Anyone? Oh, seconded by Chantel. Is there anyone opposed to adjournment? I don't even remember if we get to vote, need to vote on that. I think we're just, yeah, we are adjourned.
No, sorry, we do need to vote.
We do need to vote on it. You're nodding at me. Yes, we do. Is anyone opposed to adjournment? All right. Thank you. Have a wonderful night.